Okay.
All right. Great. So we're just going to wait for all the attendees to come in, and then we'll get started in just a second, everyone.
You mean all 100 of them?
Yeah, all 100 of them will be.
They're virtually filing in right now.
Yes, right.
I know that some of them as couples signed up individually, and I don't know if they're using two computers or one.
Yeah.
So
There we go. All right, so while we're waiting for everyone to file in, I can start with these announcements. So, hello everyone. My name is Matt Klasky. I am the manager of public programs here at the Michener, and I am beyond excited to welcome all of you to our first ever virtual Earth Day. Happy Earth Day, everyone.
Yay!
I've got a couple of quick announcements, and then we'll get right to our panel. But first, I wanted to give us a quick overview of the Zoom webinar, which we are all in right now. So everyone participating as attendees at home, only the panelists will be able to see and hear each other. So if you're listening and watching at home, feel free to eat your dinner, drink your drink, or vacuum, or do whatever you need to do. Just like TV, you will only be able to see and hear the panelists. But that doesn't mean that you can't interact and participate. You'll notice at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see icons for a chat. If you click that button, it'll open up a chat panel where you can chat with all of the other participants and the panelists. You can use that throughout the segment to talk with each other. I'll be posting some information in there later. If you want to ask a specific question to the panelists, there's another icon that says Q&A. Click on that and you'll be able to submit a question that Laura will be able to choose from towards the end of our program. Those are the two basic ways to engage with each other and the panelists during this event. Next, as we all are getting used to attending these virtual events, the Michener wants to make sure we are providing you with the best possible experience online. If you have a moment after today's event, we ask that you consider completing this very quick virtual program survey, which will help us make these programs in the future. Now I'm going to post that link in the box here. There we go. Next, we know that now more than ever, the museum and the arts are our windows to a wider world. And all of us at the Michener are so thrilled to have you joining us today. If you like what you see and are able to do so, I encourage you to make a donation to our annual fund today. Every contribution, big or small, makes a huge difference in our ability to continue to present programming like this one at no cost, now and in the future. You can do so by going to this link to our annual fund page on our website. I'm going to post that right now. Next, I wanted to let you know that while the Michener Museum is temporarily closed, you can still experience much of the museum from your home. We've collected all of our great resources for adults, kids, students, and teachers in one place on our website. It's a great resource. Please check it out. And I'm going to post that link right now. And now, finally, that's enough from me. I want us all to help us welcome our panelists. And to do this, I want you to participate by typing in your favorite fruit in the chat box. So mine is pineapple. I'm going to type that in to welcome our panelists and our moderator. And now, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our MC, our moderator, our mixologist for tonight, the Michener's Curator of American Art, Laura Igoe.
Hi, Hi, everybody. I love all the fruit that's scrolling up through my chat box here. So welcome. My name is Laura Igoe. I am the curator of American art at the Michener Art Museum, and also the curator of Rising Tides Contemporary Art in the Ecology of Water. We're being joined by several artists participating in that exhibition today. So Rising Tides features the work of 7 contemporary artists from the greater Delaware Valley who provide new perspectives on the shifting forms, topographies, and ecosystems of water. Rising Tides celebrates the power of art to visualize natural beauty, ecological crisis, and global change, and inspire us to take action towards a more environmentally sustainable future. So I thought I'd talk a little bit to start about the impetus for this exhibition, how it all came to be. So in my past research and exhibition projects, I have long been interested in the entanglement of art and the environment, but I looked specifically at the 19th century. So when I arrived at the Michener Art Museum, I wanted to explore this theme in contemporary art. And you know, this was of course very timely because we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Earth Day this year. And it was a wonderful way for me to meet artists in the greater Delaware Valley region in Philadelphia and Bucks County that were interested in these environmental themes in their art. And as I met and spoke with these artists, I noticed that there were some themes that were emerging, and one of which was that many of these artists were looking at water specifically in their art, water and the environment, and impact of climate change on watery bodies and rivers and things that lived in those landscapes. And that's not surprising, of course, as many of you probably assume, because you know, water is so fundamental to life as we know it, and it's something that you know, we can really see the impact of global warming on glaciers and oceans and rivers and the communities that rely upon them. Also, all of the participating artists in Rising Tides identify as women, and the Michener is celebrating this year the centennial of women's suffrage as well. We have several upcoming exhibitions that celebrate women artists and patrons. So it's a very timely exhibition. It celebrates and aligns with 2 very important anniversaries happening in 2020. And let me pull up my screen. And I just want to give you kind of a brief sort of overview of some of the work that will be featured. It was of course heartbreaking when COVID-19 halted installation of this exhibition, which was supposed to open on April 2nd of 2020. As you can see, these pictures were taken in the last few days before we shut down. We had the walls painted, we had the pedestals ready to go. We had even brought artwork up into the exhibition ready to put it up on the walls. But you know, we had to, of course, close the museum due to concerns of COVID-19. And now the work is safely back in our vault, awaiting our reopening. So I really want to thank especially the artists of Rising Tides. They've been such a pleasure to work with, and so supportive and flexible. We're very happy to have extended the end date of this exhibition to August 25th. I'm sorry, from the end of August to October 25th, 2020. So a few additional months, and I hope that you all will come visit when the museum reopens. I believe it is the perfect exhibition to welcome us back after months of being confined to our homes. I'm sure many of you are eager to reconnect with each other and our environment again. And the works in Rising Tides encourages us to think, to think deeply about the human impact on our planet. But they're also, I would argue, very hopeful works and even exuberant in their celebration of the natural beauty that surrounds us. So I want to start us off today. I've asked the artists to introduce themselves, but there are 3 artists in Rising Tides that are not with us today, although a couple of them may be tuning in. So I'm just going to take a brief moment to introduce their work to you as well to help provide a preview of the exhibition. I'm showing you right now Janet Filomeno's As the Sea Rises, Blue Crystals Revisited, #7. And Janet has been, her work is informed by a lifelong interest in water. And she even reenacts the movement of water through the pouring, flinging, and throwing of acrylic paint onto a large-scale stretched canvas on the floor. Her abstracted compositions visualize troubled waters, highlighted by these red boxes and lines, conveying her profound concern for our current political environment and the rapid acceleration of climate change. To me, her abstract forms recall swirling ocean currents or melting glaciers, or even a gathering of storms. And according to Janet, artists initiate new ways of seeing and guide viewers to become more aware of their natural surroundings, leading to self-transformation. This is Pat Martin's Floating Reef. And Pat Martin is also very inspired by nature. She grew up near the coast of Southern California and currently lives in Upper Black Eddy, Pennsylvania. Floating Reef references the astonishing amounts of pollution that accumulates in the oceans, in the Earth's oceans. Martin was very much affected by stories and photographs of marine life eating and living among drifting islands of plastic waste. And to create this work, she scanned images of ropes and strings and superimposed them over an abstract pastel background to create this image that to me is both beautiful and then also unsettling when you think about what it represents. And then finally, I'm showing you here two works by Paula Winokur, who was an amazing ceramicist, artist, and sculptor who passed away in 2018. And we are borrowing some work from her family and then also from Diane Burko, another participating artist who you'll hear from in a little bit, who was a good friend of Paula's. So Paula began experimenting with porcelain in the 1970s, and she used this material, which when you traditionally think, you think of porcelain, you think of, kind of dainty teacups and little saucers, so kind of small, precious objects. But she uses this material to create these large-scale sculptures. Global Warnings, which is on the left, was the first piece that Winokur made in response to climate change after viewing calving and receding glaciers in Alaska and Iceland. Each globe is inscribed with a message about how humans impact the environment. And the globes, it's hard to tell in this image, but they're very roughly textured, and in places they appear split open, conveying the irreversible damage wrought by humans over time. And the other work on the right, Shattered Ice, demonstrates the wide range of textures that Paula was able to achieve through porcelain, as the material here mimics both broken splinters of ice or cracking glaciers, shards of a material that's been damaged. So now I'm going to turn it over to the artists that are joining us today. I believe that Matt is posting bios in the Zoom box for these artists. I'll have to check on that in a minute. But I asked them, the artists, to introduce themselves using an artwork from Rising Tides that's going to be featured in the exhibition. And then I've also asked them to tell us where they are right now and what they're drinking. And I just realized that I forgot to do this. So I am coming to you live from Fishtown, the Fishtown neighborhood of Philadelphia. And it's a wonderful place to live in Philadelphia. There's some really wonderful breweries nearby, and I'm a beer drinker myself. So I am drinking, it's called Poplar Pills from Mainstay Independence, which is a brewery that's just right down the street from me on Delaware Avenue. And they do have a nautical theme in their packaging, so I thought it was particularly appropriate. So I am going to turn it over. Well, first let me say cheers. And I'm going to turn it over to first Emily Brown is going to start us off.
Hi. Hi, here I am. We moved from Philadelphia, where we lived for 53 years, to Garrison, New York, 1 year ago today. And I'm drinking some diet tonic water without anything except ice in it for the moment. But maybe when we get done, I'll add something to it. I think Laura had asked how we face our issues about the environment and our concerns in our work. And I have to say that I've never consciously done that. I've painted the landscape and water a great deal all my life because I love it, and recently have become more alarmed. But I'm not one who shows my kind of political and practical concerns very much in my work. I'm usually painting for the pleasure of it or to get in touch with myself and help relax. So I just asked if we could show a couple of older works. This one is over 40 years old, and it's a pond in Maine, a man-made pond. And I was very attracted to it because it seemed the whole situation. It's on a blueberry barren near where we have an old farmhouse, and the peaceful beauty, the rolling hillside, and relatively unfettered by man situation just made me relax, and I wanted to be there. 40 years later, there are a lot of houses along that ridge, and it's quite changed. But I started out with strong traditions in observing and standing and painting plein air for a very long time, and this is an early one. The next picture, you want to, do I do it? Okay, yeah. 20 years later, I had been working a little bit with ink wash, and I really wanted to approach natural subjects and in a very physical way. It's actually a lot harder to do ink wash than it is oil paint. And grappling with it was a very personal experience. And I continued doing that and I still do this, but also do other kinds of work. But I like the complexity of the natural subject. And this one's about body size, which many of them are, or larger. They're maybe 40 or 50 inches. Yeah, 45 tall. This is relatively small, given what I've done in many ways, but I've always, never mind. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, around the same time, it was a period of, I guess you might say, approaching aging, getting used to the fact that I wasn't always going to have the chance to be everything I wanted to be, and disappointment with one thing or another. And I was drawn to the compost in our compost pile, made a series of compost paintings and leftover things in the sink and things on the ground. And I didn't really know why. It wasn't that I was grieving consciously. I just did it, and later on figured it out, which is the way I think many of us do things on impulse and then we figure it out later. Anyway, a curator asked me if I had a self-portrait to put in a show that she was organizing, and I didn't, but I was walking along the Schuylkill River on West River Drive, and saw my shadow cast on the river, and I thought this is about as close to my self-portrait as I can get, because I think ourselves are fairly ephemeral, and we are who we are in certain contexts, and they change with the situation. And so this painting I made very quickly that same afternoon. I just went back and got my paint box and did it. So it's a different way of using water than the ideal kind of thing. This also has a lot of detritus in the water that is always slogging around by the shores of the Schuylkill, unfortunately. And the last drawing, this is in the show, and this is made on a hand-blown piece of glass that was given to me to work with. I was invited to be an artist in residence at the Wheaton Arts Center in Southern New Jersey in 2017. It was right after the inauguration of the current administration, and I was very upset. And some of the water pieces that I made are deliberately to protest what was going on and what I was fearing. And this one is part of that series. So that's my introduction. Thank you very much, Laura. I'm delighted to be in this show, and I can't wait to see what everybody else has.
Thank you, Emily. So now we're going to move on to Diane.
Can't hear you.
Oh.
Oh.
Yeah, I was mute for a moment. My question is, I have no idea what Laura is going to show. Is it just the work in the exhibition, Laura?
Are you seeing what I'm seeing right now?
I'm seeing Arctic melting. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want me to stop sharing the PowerPoint so you can be the big screen with that work behind you? With Arctic melting behind it. It's with Arctic melting behind you.
Well, actually that might be better, but you could do that for a minute, and maybe I'll take just a minute or two to give a very quick intro of what I do.
Sure.
You could show the work.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So I'll just sit here and you'll take care of it.
I'm sorry. What?
You want?
So stop this. Is that good?
Right, and then I can just do there. Like, you can't go to me speaking.
So if everyone tuning in goes to speaker view, then we can see Diane larger, because Diane is unique in that she has one of the artworks in Rising Tides right behind her at this moment.
The reason it's still in my living room is because things were stopped before.
Yes, it was supposed to be shipped soon after we had shut down, unfortunately. So it's one of the works we're still waiting on.
I don't think people really know how to do that. So why don't you just go back to the painting and I can talk.
Okay, well, I think people can, okay, that's fine. I can do that.
I don't see it. Do you see it?
I think if you click on speaker view, or anybody watching clicks on speaker view, which is the top right corner of the screen, then you should be a larger image right now. No?
No, I know what speaker view is. No. Anyway, hi, I'm Diane Burko.
Sorry, Diane.
And
I'll bring the screen back up. I apologize.
Fine. So I appreciate what Emily said, and I think Emily and I started the same way, loving the landscape and painting it. I'm an en air painter as well. That's the way I started, and sometimes I give lectures where they're titled From Landscape Artist to Landscape Activist. And basically that's what's happened over the many decades that I've been a painter, photographer. And basically, even though I started out just being fascinated with the landscape, and I should say large landscapes, monumental geological phenomenon, the Grand Canyon was one of the first projects I worked on, and there's a whole volcano series, actually the Michener has one. All those things, again, as Emily pointed out, you don't know exactly what you're doing when you're doing it, but when you stand back and look, you do see patterns and you see connections. And clearly, I think I love the big outdoors because I grew up in Brooklyn, where I was in a congested city environment, and I just enjoyed large spaces, and I enjoyed color and abstraction. And for me, a landscape always allowed me to be kind of like an abstract artist at the same time as I was painting realistic things, but they were never super real. And so I went from one kind of subject to another. As I said, there was, starting with the Grand Canyon, there was a waterway project and from the air. And a lot of my work, as you can see from what Laura's showing you now, is aerial. And that started way, way back in the 70s when I first flew in a plane, looked down, and realized I can make paintings from my own photographs. So the aerial view is important, looking at things. And then, of course, as I learned about Landsat imagery and NASA, I just love doing and continuing that. But going from being the landscape artist to the landscape architect, there's a really nice Michener connection that I always like to point out when I give talks. I give you guys credit. And that is that in 2006, I had a show there at the Michener. It was called Flow. And the curator, she was going to call it Fire and Ice. And then I think Bruce Cassidy wanted to call it Flow. But it was basically about Iceland and volcanoes, because that's what I had been doing up until about that time. And I had done a 4-year project where I traveled all over the world, experiencing flying over volcanoes, and then made a lot of paintings about them, and then wound up in Iceland as the last country that I went to, the most volcanic country in the world, and did a series of those. And so that was basically what the show was about. It was a traveling exhibition. By the time I got to the Michener, there was more room there than in the previous Tufts University Gallery. And the curator, Amy Schlegel at the time, who did the Tufts show, said, you know, I'd like to add another painting, and you used to do ice and snow way before this ice and snow, didn't you, she asked. And indeed, way back in the 70s, when I first got out of graduate school, I was doing these kind of paintings. And so we found one, a very large one, about the French Alps. And so there I was at the Michener, giving a lecture, going through the show and explaining everything, and thinking about that painting. And what I was thinking of, although I didn't share it with the audience I was speaking to, was that that painting was done in 1976. And there I was 30 years later in 2006, wondering if the snow was still there. Now you could say, why did that come up? You know, why did you think about that then? Well, the reason was because this was the same year that Al Gore had just come up with his movie, Inconvenient Truth. Elizabeth Colbert's book had just come out, Inconvenient Truths. Though his was Inconvenient Truths, but all these ideas were going through my head, and I just had this epiphany that I had to engage in this new conversation that was everywhere, climate change. And the rest is history. That's what I've been doing ever since. And it's taken many forms. And I think in the show that Laura will show you some other pieces, it's basically from then on. But I do want to point out that water has always been part of my work, starting way back when, where I did a series looking down from the coast of California, or the coast of Giverny, where I lived a number of months, or also Maine. So there've been many ways I've contemplated water in the early stages of my career. And ironically now, mostly I'm looking at water that's frozen and then melted, which indeed is another indication of, you know, sea level rise and the issues of climate change. So I think that's a okay introduction. Is that enough?
That's a great introduction. And what are you drinking, Diane?
Oh, okay. My drink of choice is always vodka. So it's clear, it's less fattening, I think, than wine, and
True.
It's what I prefer. But there's a little mixer in it. Don't think this is all vodka, is it?
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you. This chat box has been very helpful, and said they say that if I pin you, then maybe you're larger now.
It's up to you.
I can't tell.
The rest of the pieces go right ahead, and I can.
Yeah. Do you want me to talk about? Do you want to talk about a few more of your works? I just included that one.
No, whatever.
Okay. Well, we'll come back around. I do have later on in the PowerPoint. I have some more of your artworks there as well. All right. So Stacy, you're up.
Can't hear you.
All right, unmute. I'm not very mute, so it's funny to be muted. I'm kind of liking muting though. It kind of puts the cap on all this chatter that I'm very prone to. Anyway, sorry. So I grew up. I actually grew up in Philadelphia drinking the Schuylkill. because if you live west of Broad Street, that is your water source. But I'm also very much in love with the Delaware River, and I've depicted it in a lot of different ways. This is the Philadelphia Airport, baggage claim F. Not that anyone puts any baggage when they're flying locally in F, but still it's all there. A huge map of the Delaware River and all the tributaries that are running into it through the Schuylkill. Next. And I've mapped this river in a great many ways by collecting water and putting it in glasses and putting that on the floor in a big map. That's the Delaware itself right there. You can see little Tinicum Island. Next. And I've done a lot of work on the concrete and asphalt clad shores of the Delaware too. This is at Pier 53 at Washington Avenue and Columbus. I still call Columbus Delaware Avenue because I don't think roads should be named after men. I think they should be named after rivers. But of course the Delaware is named after a man too. But still, I always resented the change of that because I think site-specific roads are very, very important for us understanding the waterways and understanding where we are. Okay, next. All right, so this is a typical map that shows where the Delaware is. The museum is over to the left, the Michener is to the left, but this is where the Michener sort of, in my mind, intersects with the Delaware. And you can see how it's so carefully delineated. There's blue and then there's green and brown. Next. So very simple, wet and dry. But really, the realities of waterways is that they change a great deal. This is the Bushkill Creek in Easton, which rises, say, 20 feet every time there's a big rainstorm. And this piece called Bushkill Curtain depicted that up and down quality of this very floody stream in Easton. Next. Which does run in the Delaware. This whole idea that we need to learn more about the moving edge of the waterways. This is a local creek, local to me. It's flooding a road. Everyone anticipates that the road is going to stay dry because it's a brown or gray line on the map, and the blue is supposed to be contained with this nice blue thread on the map. But it's ever changing, and our waterways are expanding a great deal now because we have so much increased rain. Next. So I was looking at a great deal when starting the show. I'm one of these weird artists who I don't have a piece that's like that I could ship. The idea of shipping is always interesting to me. I usually ship myself, but I usually have to. If someone is giving me the chance to do a piece, I go and look at what's happening around the museum, and usually it has to do with water. And in this case, I know that the Delaware floods considerably. So I started looking at flood maps of the Delaware. So the green on this picture is showing you that nice Google map blue line where we want the river to be, and the red and the magenta-y pink is showing where that's actually fuchsia, which is a rare color. The fuchsia and the red are showing where the floods occur. And these floods used to occur like every 50 years or so, and now they're starting to occur once a year, sometimes twice a year. So we're getting a lot more flooding on our waterways. Next. So I work with these maps, and I spend a lot of time looking at USGS maps and then looking at NOAA's flood maps. And in this particular one, I really wanted to show that expansion of the Delaware, that it is not staying and it's in between, it's not coloring between its lines anymore. It's constantly expanding out. I wanted to make that a more visceral experience, okay? So I'm I'm creating at the Michener a project called Slow Tide, because this idea that the flooding is kind of going up and down like sea level rise, only it's flood level rise. That rivers which are far from the coast are flooding frequently and rising and expanding out of their banks. So it's another kind of rise, and I've been referring to it as the slow tide. I recently did a piece at Towson University, which is now sitting with the doors closed and the lights off on all the water's evaporating, of the entire watershed of Baltimore and the Baltimore County to the north where Towson is, showing, you're seeing here a big collected watershed map. So it's lots and lots of recycled glasses with the actual water poured in. And that's something I'm going to be doing with this slow tide project for the Michener. The layout is out on the floor, but we haven't started collecting yet. Okay, next. I'm often making maps, and then we can go next too. Let's see the next one. Making maps out of actually collected water. And for this project at the Michener, the slow tide, we're going to be collecting Delaware water around Washington's Crossing and slightly to the north and to the south also. So they're correct. The correct water collection goes into the actual map on the floor of the gallery. And then if it floods during the period that the show is up, we'll run out and collect the floodwaters and map that by filling the bottles that are already there. But this idea of wild water on the floor is something that I find very compelling and really like to do. Since I can't show it, I'm showing the watershed here. You can see the quality of the water is very much captured in these glasses. Sometimes it's very, very filled with sediment, and sometimes it's quite clear. Next. Here's a piece of the bay, which is extremely clean. There was some other parts of the Chesapeake Bay, not so nice, but this was actually from a swimming beach on the Chesapeake Bay. But it gives you a sense of what these collected sort of fields of jars are when they're filled with the water. And in this piece at the Michener, it'll be filled with the water from the Delaware. Okay, next. There it is, showing, this is the layout, last time I was at the gallery, showing how there'll be a river zone and the Delaware River typical flow zone, and then these flood zones that poke out depending on the topography, where the land allows basically the puddle to spread of rain. And you can see Washington's Crossings right there. So this is just showing the layout. Okay, this will all be filled with bottles, and the flood zone will, the river zone will be filled, and then the flood zone will be filled when there is a flood. So it's an active thing that requires participation from people who work with the museum and are volunteering for the museum and interested in the area in general. Going out and really getting to the river is really interesting. Next. And collecting that actual water. You know, we look at water, we think of it, we name things after it, but we rarely touch it. So I'm very much a proponent of getting people down into their streams and into their rivers. Next. And water flows in the city in all sorts of strange ways. And it's a sort of a thing that I like to do with people, to be water detectives, to figure out where you can actually touch the urban water, where you can find it. Sometimes it's running under the street, and then it spews out into a little vegetated ravine, and you become a water detective to be able to find the water. The Delaware is much easier to find, let me tell you, than the small tributaries of other cities. Next. And the whole idea of marking the water becomes kind of like a fine wine, and nice that we have cocktails here tonight. The water and its naming. So I have to know when I've selected a sample of water, it has to be very carefully labeled, because like wine, without its label, its value diminishes. Next. And a lot of times I'm also working with scientists and doing, taking data on the water quality too. Diane and I share an interest in really stepping out of the artist's discipline and bringing science into it. We're very kindred spirits in a lot of ways. We're all about exploring the natural world. We have a natural curiosity about the natural world. Perhaps scientists like more answers than artists need to live with, but it's been a very fruitful and interesting thing to work with scientists and to see how they see the world and talk about how I see the world as an artist, and sort of blend those two ways of looking at the natural world. Next. And this idea of making work that makes you think about the river a little harder than just reading Delaware on the map, or really giving people a place that they can be near the river. And this has been referred to this time, is called The Great Pause, but I often think that we don't pause enough in nature. So I'm often creating structures where people can have a moment of sitting or fishing near a river that they may not have really wanted to spend that much time near. This is the Schuylkill, and this is down at Bartram's Gardens. Next. And just new ways of appreciating the differences of rivers. This is the Monongahela to the right, joining with the Allegheny to the left. And though it looks very blue, and this piece is from a Pittsburgh calendar, it's quite, they were very different water qualities, and this piece called River Eyelash pointed that out. So I've been making a lot of work about art that gives you time to look at the river and shows you the process that the river is undergoing. So in this piece for the Michener, it'll be about regular flow and flood flow. So thank you. And I'm drinking blood orange juice with gin, because I usually have a dirty martini, but nobody made me that here. But I renamed this as flood orange juice.
Thank you, Stacy. I told the artists that I would let them introduce themselves alphabetically, and then I guess forgot the alphabet. So I apologize for that. My only excuse is that I'm working from home with 2 small children, and I'm, just losing my mind, I guess. So here's Marguerita Hagan.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is an epic Earth Day. For sure. Thank you, Laura. So the piece that I'm sharing with you is called Interdependence, and it's an installation that is a video and sculptural installation on a 33 by 15-foot wall. And I collaborated with the cinematographer and a dear friend, Richard Gretzinger, who's on here right now with us. And this, with the focus of this exhibit, Rising Tides, on this very important anniversary of Earth Day, I immediately thought about the image of the Earth, because this image that we're looking at was shot by Apollo 17 in 1972. It's the first photograph and the capture of humans seeing the Earth fully illuminated by the sun. They stopped, they broke protocol, which is a very strict schedule on that mission, on every mission, and got their camera and took this picture, which is the most recognized known photograph in the world. It also became the symbol for Earth Day. And the body of work that I'm exhibiting in this show, it's okay, is called La Mer, and it's inspired by life in the sea, from microscopic organisms on up to the largest creature on our planet, the blue whale. So I imagine laying out my work in the oceans, like through this image. So thank you, Laura. We can go to the next slide. So I laid them out in the currents, the ocean currents. And I did this, and what we're looking at in that image, it was the first time they had captured an image of Antarctica, and it had a lot of, of Africa. Okay, next one. And we're going to see if we can play this. I was laying them out, mapped on the floor. 12 feet diameter is the scale of the projection. There isn't any sound, but what happened to be playing, I was playing a soundtrack to Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and the song that came out is I Will Survive, as I was laying this out. So I had to get a video of that, but anyway, these are microorganisms, one-cell organisms. Our primary producers in our oceans are so extraordinary, and they've been around. They're the first life forms on our planet. Our life, water is life, and life began in the sea. And they form beautiful colonies and networks and have worked together for so many millions of years. Like radiolarians is one species, and they've been around for 540 million years, doing pretty well without us. But these pieces are also include my shields, which is a thing of protection. Behind my head, you can see my wildlife shields. This is a weedy sea dragon, an extraordinary creature that lives around Australia, a little spotted drumfish, and a jewel pufferfish. But shield is a thing of protection, and it's also like honors a family lineage. And in my work, it's recognizing the species we share the planet with. So we can go to the next slide. So that was me mapping out. Then I did a drawing of what I laid out on the floor, is to the best to scale as possible, so you can see my drawing here. And then the next image will show the full wall. And because Earth is our home, it's called the blue planet, of course, because of the ocean. And but it's in space, and my work is all about the connection and things, and we are not separate. Nothing is separate, and Earth is a part of a galaxy in the universe. So out in the space, I have celestial bodies that are also, you know, from my Lumiere series out there in space. Next slide. And then working with Rich, we got the photos of all of my sculptures, and he helped map this out. This is the legend of interdependence. And it's okay. You can switch. Now, this is a clip Rich put together. It's just a few seconds long, but it's starting with Dr. Sylvia Earle calls the ocean the blue heart of our planet, and that we must take care of our heart. And first you're gonna hear the sound. Hopefully this sound will work, but what starts in the first few seconds is the sound of space. Literally, Rich got the sound of space. If you're an astronaut and you're out there, this sound is like a hissing sound. And then within about 8 seconds, 13 seconds, the heartbeat starts. And with the heartbeat, Rich's programmed lighting that will just start to go on one piece and then another until over time, all these pieces will be lit. No sound, but you'll see when you come to the show. Now, here's another clip. We're gonna be zooming into the ocean, and before we do, there's a call, a trumpet, so to speak, of humpback whales singing. And there are two. Rich got two humpbacks singing, and they'll be on different speakers, but they're singing to each other. You'd be hearing that now. You'd hear the sound of the ocean, but what is this green stuff coming in? This is an extraordinary thing. These are plankton blooms. They are produced by the plankton inside the one-cell organisms like diatoms and dinoflagellates. They house plankton, and when they bloom in the spring, they can be seen from space. So it is a micro to macro, and they work together in those colonies. This is how we get every other breath we breathe, is by the photosynthesizing of the plankton and these primary producers supporting life on our planet. They've been doing this for so many millions of years, and they work together. And they're a beautiful example to us. And if we can wake up, especially now with this huge wake-up call that we're living in, to learn from these microorganisms that have been able to keep us alive and all life alive on our planet, actually. So let's see, what else, Laura? Is there anything? I have 7 sculptures that will be on pedestals. That's the large installation, and I'm working on a piece now that will be finished probably within the week. But this is a piece called Frusta Flower. It's a micro grow piece. My grow pieces are intuitive works that are inspired by like a play on light. And I incorporated the architecture of diatoms in this piece, and it's a new series. A frustal if I'm pronouncing that correct, is a test or a shell. It's what you call the housing of a diatom. So, and they are all, it's really about growth. So this is a, you know, blooming little light show going on there. Now this is a piece called Lophelia, a perpetual Lophelia pertusa. And like Diane and Stacy, I also love working with scientists and the relationships and the bonds and the networking that occurs, the things that we can learn from each other. And then as artists, we can give visual voice to these, for many things, but mostly for me, much of the unseen world. This is because of Diane and I went to visit Dr. Eric Cortez and got to meet him and Alexis Weinig, his PhD assistant. And we got to see samples of the Lophelia pertusa that he brought back shortly after he discovered the largest known deep sea coral in the world. It's about 100 miles long, and surprisingly, it's off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina. And corals, there are much more deep sea corals in our seas than there are warm water corals, which we're much more familiar with. But they look like branching white anemones, and they're just so beautiful. I started this piece, and my work is very intuitive, but I do extensive research. I talk to scientists, I dive, and I like to, like Stacy, I like to get in the water, and Diane too, to get in the water and see things. And but I started this piece, and I figure out sometimes as I go, and this piece unfolded that way. So it's like an infinity piece. It's like a little pom-pom, but the intention is for these reefs to be safe and keep going. Because of Eric's work, the Charleston Chamber of Commerce reached out to him in a bipartisan agreement. The White House was really aiming to allow drilling to be there. It's possible that these reefs of that size may have been growing for 40,000 years. So they could be wiped out in a second. But now the drilling is off the table for a number of reasons. But pieces like this and a lot of the work that us artists do that work with scientists and are inspired by science also in nature really helps to share really important things like that with the world through our work.
Thank you, Marguerita. And thank you, everyone, for presenting your work and talking about the wonderful things that you do and we'll share in our exhibition, Rising Tides. So we are getting close to 6:30, actually. So I'm going to ask if anyone tuning in has questions to type them actually into the Q&A section. I think that's easier for me than navigating the chat. And I'm going to ask one question for everybody, and then because I want to make sure that everyone else can kind of ask questions too, and I don't want to kind of go too long.
Laura.
Yeah. Oh, you want to try your drink?
Okay. So, my last diving trip was in Cayman Island, and that was extraordinary. I got to do wall diving. It inspired all the work that I've worked on this year. My marine abstracts, from sea sponges to the female spawning brain coral that I'm working on. But I was given this gift, and it's called 7 Fathoms. So it's a distillery, Cayman Distillery. This rum was aged 7 fathoms under the sea. So that's what I brought to the table today.
Well, cheers. Cheers, everybody. So I am going to skip kind of ahead to one question that I had, which I think might be on everybody's minds, which is that when this exhibition finally opens, the COVID-19 pandemic and its repercussions will undoubtedly still be on everyone's minds. It's going to impact the way we live and interact with each other for months, or perhaps even years to come. So how has this pandemic shifted your perspective on art, climate change, and the environment? And I want to just, well, why don't I first start with, how about I'll start with Diane.
Mute. Diane, you're muted.
I'm like Stacy, I'm always talking, so for me to be muted. I've been asked that question a lot. And when this first happened, I was writing to friends, I would say, oh, maybe this is the silver lining. People are going to see that we're all in this together. We're all one planet, the virus, climate change, all these parallels. And then after reading an article, I think it was by Friedman in the Times, sort of woke me up. It's not the same. The difference is that with this pandemic, we have the curve, you know, we arrive and then we go down. And with climate change, there is no going down. We are here and we keep getting higher, and there's no vaccine. The only vaccine is for us to finally wake up, and maybe in 30 or 40 years, we can start repairing the earth. And actually, everyone's so excited now about animals coming out, and this is also wonderful. It is, but it's just a moment in time. And someone was saying it's like a bathtub, you know, CO2 in the atmosphere. And what's happened is, this is our bathtub, the world, you know, our atmosphere, and it's being filled with CO2. And the only thing that's happening now is, instead of it being rushed in the way it has with all of Trump's wonderful policies, it's coming in a little slower, but it's still coming in. So I hate to be glum, but you know, we still have to wake people up, but the parallel no longer makes me feel that good.
Mm. How about you, Stacy? What are your, or sorry, Emily, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. I agree with Diane. I at first thought this is such an optimistic thing, that people are finally understanding that we're all interconnected, and whatever happens to one part of society is going to affect everybody. And then you think, well, people's greed and their supposed need for power is not going to stop. And I'm very discouraged. I wish we could do something immediately to the petroleum industry, you know, and right now they're like paying people to take their gas away. It's like, what the oil, you know, how can we use that and turn it into, now it's time for you to start doing renewables, you know, hire the same people to do renewables. Why can't somebody get that going?
We have to vote. That's the one thing we can all do.
I know. Well, do you think we can get some of those guys to really stand up for it? You know, the people.
I want to push them down. I don't want them to stand up.
Well, I mean, somebody, if we vote, somebody we're going to vote for.
I think, there is hope. Yeah.
Do you find that art is a good way to tackle these challenges, or at least educate the public in some way about them? How about Marguerita or Stacy? Do you have any thoughts?
That's Stacy's work. That's all she does.
And Marguerita's looks pretty full too in that way. I think it's very informative and inspiring. Yeah.
I think artists historically have been among the pioneers on the planet, breaking ground. And I think if you look at artwork over time, it gives you a pulse of the consciousness of the planet at that time. So as artists, it is a great honor, but it's a responsibility for us to be, you know, be on the front here to share in every way that we do and that we can what's most important. And it couldn't be more important right now. It's so critical. Nature has ordered everything to stop, for us to listen and for us to reset. How that will happen, I agree with everybody. It's going to take a lot of time, but we can never go back. And things that have been so toxic and so dysfunctional, so damaging to many, profiting a few, they all need to come apart and collapse. And I think we're seeing a lot of collapse. I think we're going to see a lot more. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. It's going to look horrendous, but I feel like it's an important clearing.
Stacy?
And also, I think it's really important that that science and art not be torn asunder. There's this idea that artists are just making things up. We're fantasizing, and scientists are all hard and fast facts. And that's really an absurd, poorly formed definition.
Mm-hmm.
Artists have always been like scientists, and scientists have always been like artists, thinking things up, like making hypotheses that seem fantastical until they're proven. And if you think about how art and science used to be much more closely entwined, Leonardo da Vinci did not think of himself as a painter. He thought of himself as a scientist. And he was one of the great scientists he was the greatest of his era and continues to be amazing because of that close observation that artists also give the world. So this sort of dichotomy that this separation we try and make between art and science is absurd and needs to be dropped into the ash can, because scientists can have fantasies and artists can be as real can be. And it's very important to remember too that scientists are particularly non-visual people for some reason, and they do not allow their data to be seen or to be translated into a normal person's mind and eye. And this is a terrible problem. This is why creationists, creation stories are amazingly compelling. Science stories are not compelling because they haven't learned to make it visceral, and they need artists to be the translators of scientific stories. And I think that's what unites all of us. We are translators of the natural world. We love it, but we also want to show it in all its aspects so that people can start to think about it in a really different way.
But Stacy, I think scientists are exactly aware of what you're saying. I know you've been welcome. Marguerita and I have been welcome into labs, going on expeditions. Scientists appreciate our taking their data and translating it. I mean, I get written into NSF grants because we are the communicators. They do want us to process it and reach out.
But Stacy, maybe you're speaking about like published science papers. Is that the kind of, I don't know, but the way it's so specific. But I have been co-authored by a dear friend and a scientist, Dr. John Junk, who did a piece for commemorating the Ernst Haeckel's birth or passing, but it was this last summer. So there's a lot of ways that artists and scientists definitely work together, even in those very specific science papers, they can interact. And it is a long history. You think about Neolithic, I do tableware with Neolithic petroglyphs on them. Oh, good. Here we are at the American Geophysical Union. There's Diane and I. She invited me to be the other artist on a panel with the brilliant scientist. Stuart Sandin is right there. Mark Aikens is in this. He oversees all coral survey for NOAA. And Stuart is at Scripps, Institute of Oceanography. But anyway, the Neolithic petroglyphs, you think about, the artists have been doing this forever. So that's like 9,000 to 3,000 BC. This is like, you really wanted to do this visual work if you were going to be carving in a stone to stone in the Stone Age, to carve these beautiful patterns and messages that were many astronomical in nature, documenting, like the oldest known recording of a total solar eclipse is in a rock in Ireland. But that was like, this has been going on ever since humans have been on the planet. Mm-hmm. The visual there and sharing. There's Mark. He was doing his presentation. We had a poster conference, and then there's Diane and Richard talking to Stuart. But Stuart has this incredible project called the 100 Island Project, and he's got 100 sites around the world that he's been following remote imaging, that he takes that data and prints 3D so that the coral, he has 3D printing of the coral to follow the health of the corals around the world. And that's one thing he's showing. It was an amazing day.
I'm just showing these images because it shows examples of both Diane and Marguerita, working closely with scientists and taking inspiration from them in their work. So very powerful pieces. I have one question here, which kind of relates to what we've said from Karen. It says, how do you think artists can reach further than galleries? She says that it's interesting to hear from artists like this in a forum. When going to a gallery, perhaps it's harder to hear this message. Do any of you have thoughts about that? And I'll stop this share.
It all depends who the gallerist is.
I guess that's fair, right?
In my career, I won't do an exhibition unless the gallery, institution, museum agrees to do public engagement and programming about climate change. And actually, going back to Paula Winokur, my dear friend, she and I were in a show together at Keene University a number of years ago. And I said to Paula, we're not doing this unless. And we had an incredible panel the following day after the opening with a lot of NOAA people, scientists, and it was an all university lecture. So we're in charge, we can get more audience in.
And there's actually, in Rising Tides, I should mention, there are a number of different ways to engage with the art, or there will be when the exhibition opens, not just through, your standard text labels, but our education department has been working on a really wonderful audio tour as well, where you can hear these artists, as well as Pat Martin and Janet Filomeno, speak about their work while looking at the work actually in the gallery. And we have a number of exciting programs that are planned for the fall as well around the exhibition. So there's going to be multiple ways to engage and learn more, which we're really excited about. So we're over time already. I wish we had more time. It's amazing how quickly time flies. But I want to thank everyone for coming. Are there any kind of final thoughts that you, Marguerita, Stacy, Diane, or Emily want to share before we sign off?
Thank you, Laura.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you all. Like I said, it's been wonderful working with all of you, and I can't wait to see the art actually on display and people being able to see it. I sincerely hope that it will happen soon.
I just want to say a response to that last question is, art is really out in the world, and it's so out in the world, and Stacy's work is certainly out in the world, but not, the gallery is only one way to do it. It's a great way, but it's just one way. And I also want to thank Matt. Matt, thanks so much for steering this ship for us.
Yes, thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Laura, so much.
And I just want to pick up just really quickly. Thank you for making this whole thing happen, Laura and Matt, and keeping us afloat during this time where we'd otherwise be very isolated. But I do think that's this period where the bricks and mortar institutions are going to find themselves on a bumpier trail, maybe giving artists new venues for showing things that happen along highways and sidewalks and in people's driveways as much as anywhere else. So as problematic as this is for museums and other places of gathering to close, I hope that it opens up artists to new venues that can be found in very unexpected places, so that there can just be more art everywhere.
Love it.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Stacy. Cheers. And I also want to say this is being recorded, and we will be sharing it, I think, through our YouTube channel as well. I see a lot of questions about that as well. So thank you all for coming and participating, and stay well. And cheers.
Thank you.
Enjoy your evening.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.